Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest on for the first time, Chris Barakat. If you're not familiar with him, he is a competitive natural bodybuilder, and he also received his master's degree in exercise and nutritional science at the University of Tampa. And I'm sure there are many other things that we'll dive into here that Chris is known for as well too. But thanks for coming on, man. Excited to have you on and chat today.
No, my pleasure, man. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, for the first whenever I bring a new guest on, I always just kind of like to, maybe just do a little quick background on them in terms of like, what I guess maybe what you've done in the past in the fitness
For
industry
sure.
or what got you into it, anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. So I usually tell a little background story where I've always been interested in physical exercise and some sort of competitive outlet. So when I was way younger, I was really interested in martial arts. One of my oldest brothers competed in professional MMA for a while, and just martial arts was just a thing in my family. My father got us into. Then I took competitive basketball really seriously. That was my passion. Um, Absolutely loved it. Took it super seriously. And something that was frustrating to me about basketball was it's a team sport. So, if you practice 8 hours a day and your teammates don't practice at all year round and they just practice during the season or whatever, it can be frustrating. But I couldn't play at the D1 level. So once I went to college, I just needed a competitive outlet. And I always loved the strength and conditioning work, the physical training of both martial arts and basketball. So it kind of got me just involved in the gym. And I was training sort of like a bodybuilder, just trying to look better. And my first year of college, I came across natural bodybuilding competitions, and I didn't know that was an outlet at all. When I thought of bodybuilding, I thought of Flex Magazine, Muscular Development Magazine, and 240-pound,
Yeah.
enhanced athletes. So yeah, I decided to give this whole natural bodybuilding thing a shot, and I caught the bug. I fell in love with it, and it changed my academic trajectory and what I wanted to study. So yeah, it really impacted everything I've done since 2010, and it's totally changed my life, and it's a huge part of my life. And yeah, now I teach at the University of Tampa part-time. I've been researching there since 2016, and yeah, I have a lot of experience coaching people, gen pop competitors, athletes in different sports, but primarily physique athletes. And this is what I love. I love enhancing body composition outcomes and performance outcomes through optimizing your training, your nutrition, and everything that comes about that.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely want to dive into some of the research that you've done because I know there's been a couple ones there on that. So you said you do some coaching, and then you're also teaching part time. What are like some of the classes that you teach?
Yeah. Yeah. So I currently teach a nutritional supplements elective course. I previously taught exercise science courses, general nutrition courses. And then every once in a while, I do a guest lecture for exercise testing and prescription or a grad course. So, yeah, that's just a side gig for me, honestly, just so I can stay in the human performance lab and research there. I do enjoy teaching, but something that's frustrating in the formal academic setting is you can have 25 kids in a class and maybe 5 to 7 of them are super interested in being there, and the other ones are there because mommy and daddy wants them to get a college degree. So that's frustrating where the people I coach, they're paying for a service, they're very invested in getting the results, and they're very eager to learn. So I like educating people that really want to learn as well. So I have different ways to go about that through online courses and training programs and whatnot. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And yeah, I could imagine, a lot of, like you said, a lot of the people that come to the classes probably don't necessarily they're not, they're not seeking that out. Like you said, it's more so to get the electives, get the degree or whatever. Whereas like people online, when you have these courses and whatnot, they want to actually get that knowledge. And I think that definitely makes your job way easier.
Yeah.
Cool. So to go on the research side of things, like I said, there was a couple. I know that I know for sure the body recomposition one. You were a big part of that, so I know that was one. Is there any other research articles that you've been a part of, or any research studies?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I've been a part of a bunch. So I think I have 13 publications at this point, but the one that by far had the largest impact and the most reach was a narrative review that I wrote with some colleagues on body recomposition. It was literally the first scientific peer-reviewed study that even used the term body recomposition. Before that, if you type that in, something like PubMed or Google Scholar, you wouldn't get anything. So the thing that I found fascinating, I'll kind of backtrack and how that even came about, was my first research study ever that I was a co-author on. My buddy Jacob Rauch was the primary investigator. We were looking at autoregulation of exercise selection versus taking a traditional pre-planned approach to your training for the day. I won't get into the details of the study, but we were interested in seeing if having more autonomy and autoregulation within someone's program, is that going to lead to better strength and hypertrophy outcomes? And what we found was the autoregulatory group did have greater strength outcomes and greater gains in lean body mass. With that said, when going into the study, I wasn't thinking about body recomposition at all. We were just really interested in who's going to put on the most amount of muscle, who's going to make the greatest gains, whatever. That was what we were focused on. But when I looked at the individual subjects in both groups, I saw some subjects gain muscle, some subjects lost muscle, some subjects recomped, some subjects decomped, right? So the individual responses were all over the place, and I just found that really interesting. And then the second study I was a part of was in collegiate volleyball players at the University of Tampa. And again, my buddy Jacob Rauch was the primary investigator there. But those athletes were getting nutritional guidance from a sports nutritionist, and they were undergoing a specific training regimen. We were looking at velocity-based training versus traditional training. Those details don't matter, but the body recomposition outcomes in that study was just like mind-blowing. And it really got me more and more curious and intrigued on this topic. So in that particular study, it was only 7 weeks of training. The females in basically both groups gained like 6 pounds of lean mass while losing 5 pounds of fat mass simultaneously. So obviously, on average, their scale weight's basically not moving at all, but their body fat percent is massively changing. And that's something I would see all the time with my one-on-one clients, whether they're Gen Pop or competitors or whatever. I would see body recomp all the time, but it wasn't something that we spoke about directly in the scientific literature, even if the results section did share changes in lean mass, changes in fat mass. They weren't talking about recomping. And obviously, not every single study is demonstrating recomp on a group average basis, but I could almost guarantee that every study does have a few individuals undergoing recomposition effects. So kept diving down this rabbit hole, and something that frustrated me in the fitness industry as a whole is you just constantly hear you need to be in a surplus to gain muscle, you need to be in a deficit to lose fat. And it's truly more complicated than that. It's not that simple. It's not that black and white. And I got really, really sick of just hearing, honestly, like, other published researchers, not just, your Joe Schmo strength and conditioning guy or online trainer. Like, you would hear other researchers kind of say the same thing. And I just got really annoyed with it. And then in 2019, Jeff Nippert and I collaborated on an ebook that was called The Ultimate Guide to Body Recomposition. So when working on that ebook, I had to go through not just the scientific studies I've been a part of in our lab that I saw recomp happening every single semester. I'm like, all right, let me see what the other scientific literature said. It was all over. Like, there's so much data there. And then in 2020, my colleagues and I wrote a formal peer-reviewed paper on body recomposition in trained individuals. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but that's more of a thorough explanation on how that paper came about and why I wanted to, formally investigate and share my thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I'm glad that you were doing that. You kind of saw, hey, it's like, hey, you had to be in a surplus, but then you said, you were seeing that you didn't have to do that. And I think the big thing with that study too was it was in trained subjects as well too. It wasn't like you said, it was just somebody who hadn't been training for a while was also in trained subjects.
Yeah.
A few questions off of that, because I did read through it the other day. Do you kind of like, I guess in the paper, I didn't really see anything specifically about it, but like in terms of like the energy balance, was that something that you were able to find any information on? Because I looked in the nutrition, and you could correct me if I'm wrong here, but I saw it was like protein's the biggest thing, for body recomposition from a nutrition standpoint. Was there anything specific there that yeah, like did that matter, or what
Yeah.
were your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So it's honestly very complicated, and there's still things that researchers don't fully understand in terms of the mechanisms and the complexities there. But there's a lot of cool data in protein overfeeding studies. For example, one out of Bill Campbell's lab and another out of Jose Antonio's lab. So Bill Campbell's at USF here in Tampa. Jose Antonio's at Florida Atlantic University on the other coast. And long story short, like Bill Campbell did a high protein versus low protein study in aspiring female physique athletes. And he saw that the high protein group that was eating, I think it was around 370 more calories on average per day, gained more lean mass and lost more fat mass than the group consuming fewer calories per day and less protein. And then Dr. Antonio's research, he has multiple studies on protein overfeeding, so to speak, or very high protein diets. And he would see in a lot of his results, the gains in lean body mass was the same from like a moderate protein intake to a high protein intake. But the higher protein intake groups always demonstrated greater reductions in fat mass. We would hypothesize that that is due to the thermic effect of food and that you're burning more calories consuming more protein, right? It's the most thermogenic macronutrient that we can consume. So a way to kind of explain this to people is everyone just talks about CECO, calories in, calories out. If you take a 2,000 calorie diet, right? And let's say you consume a 2,000 calorie diet for 14 days straight, and you're consuming 130 grams of protein on that 2,000 calorie diet. And then 14 days later, you still intake 2,000 calories per day for another 14 days, but you increased your protein from 130 to 190. Your caloric intake is still 2,000 calories, but the other side of the scale, the CECO, is going to be higher because your thermic effect of food is higher because your protein intake is higher. So that's definitely one component as to why you can see greater reductions in fat mass with higher protein intakes, but it's not fully well understood. There's a great paper by Slater and colleagues that basically says, I think it's titled, "Is a caloric surplus required to maximize muscle building?" Something along those lines. And it's just something that is not super well understood. Protein is going to be the most important macronutrient for sure. You want to be in a positive nitrogen balance to build muscle, right? Like muscle protein synthesis needs to outweigh muscle protein breakdown. But there are so many things that contribute to muscle protein synthesis. It's not just your protein intake. It's how your body is responding to the training stimulus, what type of training you're doing. Far away are you from your genetic potential, your muscle building potential, or how close are you to your natural muscle building potential? So there are so many factors that come into play. And that's why when you look at one randomized control trial, when you just look at group averages, that doesn't describe exactly how you are going to respond as an individual of N=1. So I get really fascinated by looking at our data sets when we do randomized control trials. And sometimes I'm not really paying attention as much to the group means as some of my colleagues that like running the statistical analyses and all this. I'm just like, why did that person gain 8 pounds of lean mass and that person only gained 1 pound? And then I might know these subjects after seeing them in the lab for 12 weeks. I'm like, all right, well, that person likes to party more on weekends. Just you know what I mean? I start thinking about these things. And then obviously when I work with clients on a one-on-one basis, I have a lot more control of exactly what they're doing nutritionally. I know what their day-to-day habits are, what their life stress demands look like. And I get so much feedback from them that I can pinpoint what's moving the needle a bit more and what's not, working in their favor.
Yeah, I think that's good because, like you said, the mean's just the average of the entire group, and it's like looking into the specific individuals is super important. But like you said, it also is really dependent on like a lot of other factors, and I think one that maybe you didn't hit on when you were just talking about that was like, and you guys mentioned this in the paper, was sleep was a big one too. That again, if that's off, it's like that's going to play a big role, right? So it's like people hear, oh, I can build muscle, like that's kind of my thing with it too, is like I hear people be like, oh, you have to be in this surplus to build muscle, but it's like you also need to look at your lifestyle factors too. And I feel like a lot of people miss out on that part, like you said, the protein, sending the right training signal, sleep, stuff like that.
Yeah, well, it's just factually untrue that you don't need to be in a surplus to build muscle. You can build muscle at maintenance, in a surplus, or in a deficit. And you will also build zero muscle in a surplus if you're not training, right? So I can eat 400 grams of protein per day. If I'm not resistance training in a progressive manner, I'm not going to build any muscle. So the surplus doesn't matter. Another thing that's misunderstood is people think that entering a caloric deficit automatically means that you are going to lose fat. This is controversial, and I kind of want to do another like social media post on this at some time. But something came up 2 days ago. I made a post 4 years ago. I saw like my Facebook reminder. There was a time period where I was under a very high load of stress, psychological, emotional stress. I wasn't eating a lot at all because the appetite wasn't there. I was training at low intensities and low frequencies, and I lost a significant amount of scale weight, and I DEXA'd like pre and post. And it actually showed, again, the DEXA is not perfect, but the results were so large that the DEXA results showed that I lost lean body mass and I gained fat mass. So even though I lost body weight, why did I gain fat mass, right? I was definitely in a caloric deficit, but I didn't lose any fat. I actually gained fat. So how do you explain that, right? These things are so much more complicated than what an infographic can explain in 7 words, or an X and a check mark of this is what you need to do and this is what you shouldn't be doing. So the oversimplification of complex metabolic processes drives me insane. Yeah.
Well, it almost sounds like, and I'm glad you brought that up too, because like you said, it's like just because you're in a deficit too doesn't necessarily mean you're going to lose fat mass. And this is exactly what I wanted to bring you on about, was to talk about body composition stuff.
Yeah.
But it almost sounds like, again, if you're, in a surplus or a deficit, it's like that's going to determine, potentially where your weight trends, but that doesn't necessarily mean that like the body composition is where you want it to be.
Facts.
So was there anything with this particular study, was there anything that was surprising to you or anything like that? Or was it all pretty much what you thought, what it was going to be going into it? Or
the recomposition study?
Yeah.
So I want to clarify to you and like just make sure the audience understands. So the recomposition study that was published was a narrative review paper.
Right.
So we looked at multiple randomized control trials that were previously done that demonstrated body recomp, and we shared our thoughts as to why we believe they saw what they saw. There is nothing that necessarily surprised me. Some of the really interesting data points out there are on sleep, and you kind of briefly touched on that. So there's a really cool study by Wang and colleagues that looked at caloric restriction for fat loss without resistance training. And I'll give a really quick background on it.
Yeah.
There was 2 groups. Both groups were calorie restricted, and their caloric restriction was equated. So like each individual was theoretically in a 500 calorie deficit. One group was calorically restricted, but also sleep restricted. So they were forced to sleep 5 hours per night, where the other group was able to sleep 8 hours per night. The interesting thing was weight loss was identical between both groups. If you look at body mass changes, they lost the same amount of kilograms. The group that was calorically restricted but was not sleep restricted and slept approximately 8 hours per day lost 80% fat mass and 20% lean mass, give or take. The group that was sleep restricted only lost 20-ish% or 17-ish% fat mass and lost approximately 80% lean mass. So yeah, their weight loss was the same, but the composition of that weight loss was literally the opposite. And that wasn't with resistance training. So it's just, here's a calorie deficit, do this for X amount of time, let's see what happens. That was a cool data point. And then more recently, I believe in 2019, a study utilized resistance training and sleep hygiene education. So one group was educated on how they can improve their sleep. They were told really basic things like try to wake up and sleep at the same times each day, try to omit caffeine 8 hours before going to bed, try not to use technology 3 hours before bed, blackout shades, potentially use blue light blockers, all of these things to potentially optimize your sleep. And this was in relatively untrained individuals. Both groups gained muscle because it was a resistance training, like a progressive resistance training study. Both groups did the same training. But the sleep hygiene group that was educated in this realm they gained significantly more muscle mass and they lost more fat mass. So they saw better body composition outcomes. So yeah, sleep is definitely a very important variable that, again, isn't really well understood. We don't understand the magnitude of impact this can truly have on each individual, but it's clearly there. It impacts our hormone outcomes. It impacts our body comp outcomes, how we regulate blood glucose, what our insulin sensitivity looks like. So how we utilize carbohydrates, what our cortisol levels are going to look like in the AM, so on and so forth. So sleep is definitely a really interesting factor. Yeah, that was a little bit of a rant, but no, nothing really surprised me while writing the narrative review. It was kind of just like, here's a bunch of randomized control trials that have previously been done. Here are their results, and here are some thoughts as to why these body recomposition results are being demonstrated.
Yeah, no, that's good. I'm glad that you brought that up too, to, clarify, hey, we didn't actually do any research. We just looked at everything that was out there and then gave up our reasons for body recomposition. So has anything, like, since that, when did this paper come out? It was like 2018?
That was 2020. The recomp paper was
Okay.
2020. Yeah.
Has anything since then, like, in terms of research, come out that's like maybe change your mind on anything at all? Or is it's
No, so I'm still interested in exploring this topic in more detail, with different methodologies.
Yeah.
There's more and more evidence that, this is constantly reported in the literature. We see it on a pretty regular basis. No, I mean, it's something I'm continuing to explore. There's nothing like that was recently published that changed my mind by any means, but there's a lot more studying to do to get a great understanding. But the thing that everybody should understand is the further away you are from your muscle building potential and the more body fat you have, the greater likelihood you have of achieving recomp, or the magnitude of your recomposition can be larger. That's super important to understand. It makes a lot of sense in theory. And that's what we see when I work with individuals one-on-one. When the subjects coming into the lab have these positive outcomes, I kind of get an idea of why that's occurring. But putting objective numbers on it is really, really hard to do based on scientific literature right now. And again, all the confounding variables that impact it, their nutrition, their sleep, their stress, their genetics. So it's insane.
Yeah. And I think this is important because, obviously, like, I feel like everybody knows the importance of, adding muscle now and what it can do for your overall health. But I feel like a lot of people end up like shying away from doing it because they think they have to like gain all this body weight to do it. And so then like you end up with these people that just, they never really change their body because they're afraid, they think that they have to be in a surplus to build muscle. They're like, well, I'm not gaining weight, I don't need to do that. So I think this is great because I think that will help out. I think it can help out a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, things I think really need to be measured for each individual trying to maximize their progress. You need to be logbooking your lifts. Like, you need to be tracking your lifts and seeing how strength is improving over time. Besides taking scale weight and seeing how that's trending over time, you should take something as simple as a waist circumference measurement. So if your waist circumference goes up significantly, you can confidently say that you probably put on some body fat. If your waist circumference has come down, noticeably on a measurement, you can confidently say you have lost body fat, regardless of what's going on with the scale. If you are progressively getting stronger, you are probably building muscle mass. If you're not making any strength gains at all, probably not building much muscle. And if you're losing strength, you might be losing muscle, especially if you're chronically losing strength. And you really need to critically address what you're doing nutritionally, what your recovery looks like. Are you training too much per session? Are you training too frequently, too much per week? You got to consider all those things. But yeah, tracking certain metrics from a objective standpoint can be very beneficial to see, am I moving in the right direction, or am I kind of just spinning my wheels?
Awesome. Yeah. So I guess this is probably a good time to just transition into the body comp talk. It wouldn't make much sense to change and go back. So sure. I guess then, with all that out of the way and everything like that, how would you describe to somebody, understanding the difference between body comp and scale weight? Like, what would be the differences? Maybe like what is body composition made up of? Because again, like you said, I think the common misconception myth out there is like scale weight, just it goes down. Hey, this is good. That automatically is good. So I'm curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I could really dive into this. But real quick, before I do, your audience, can you give me a quick understanding of how you perceive their primary interest and level of experience and everything like that?
Yeah, so I would say the audience is, it's definitely not like they have a general idea of training, nutrition, right? It's
Sure.
not like they know what macros are, they know what, they know, building muscle, like they know importance of steps, stuff like that, right? So
Sure.
I would say intermediate
Okay. Okay, cool.
to
Yeah, so
advanced.
sure. Let me dive into like the differences. So obviously your body weight or your total body mass is just that, literally how much your entire body weighs. Your body composition can be broken down into different compartments. So generally speaking, if you want to be as general as possible, you have your fat mass and your lean mass. Lean mass is also termed fat-free mass in the scientific literature a lot. All right. So if you want to just look at two compartments, you have fat mass, you have lean mass. If you want to look at three compartments, you can break it down into fat mass, lean body mass, and bone mineral content. And then if you want to break it down into four compartments, which is generally the most objective or accurate way to do it, is you have fat mass, you have lean mass, you have bone mineral content, and you also have water. And our muscle is approximately 70-ish% water. Our adipocytes, our fat cells, also consume or are also made up of some sorts of water, right? So how is water impacted? It's impacted by how we train. It's impacted by our nutritional status. So how much carbs are we consuming? And then water can also be subcategorized by your total body water and then intracellular versus extracellular water. So again, when you're stepping on the scale, if you weigh in and you're 170 pounds, cool. But you can have a male that is 170 pounds at 20% body fat, and you can have a male that's 170 pounds at 6% body fat. So their body composition is going to be totally different, even though their body weight's the same. And again, even if your main goal is fat loss, depending on where you're at, perhaps you should be losing some scale weight and total body mass. But perhaps you don't have to. Your body weight might actually be going up depending on your level of advancement. So I see this all the time with clients, but I'll just share like the most recent experience where this has happened to a very significant manner. I'm working with a client right now who's 51 years old. In our first 12 weeks of working together, he put on, I think, 7 to 8 pounds of lean body mass on a DEXA scan while simultaneously losing 3 pounds of fat mass. So his scale weight was going up each and every week. He went from like 163-ish to like 170, 171-ish. If you are hyper focused on scale weight, if your body weight goes, so let's say you're nailing your training and you're nailing your nutrition, and from week 1 to week 2, your body weight goes from 163 to 164 and a half. And then from week 2 to week 3, it goes 164 and a half to 165 and a half. And it keeps trending up. If you're hyper focused on scale weight, you're going to say, my nutrition, this isn't working. My training's not, where something's going wrong. What is happening? I'm supposed to be losing weight. I'm supposed to be losing fat. Fortunately, he was also tracking his waist circumference measurements. He was also taking progress photos, and he was paying attention to other factors like how does his clothes fit? Is he filling out his sleeves a little bit more? Is he getting stronger in the gym? And I kind of warned him. I gave him a heads up beforehand. I said, hey, we're not focused on scale weight right now. I want you to focus on developing these good habits. I want you to focus on progressing in the gym. And we will track these objective metrics and see how things change over time. But yeah, fortunately for him, he executed well. He understood that the goal wasn't weight loss. It was improving his overall health, getting stronger, building muscle, losing fat. And that's exactly what happened. So it's just important to pay attention to other metrics and not say, hey, I want to lose fat, so I must be losing weight each week or each month. That might not be true. And if you force yourself to lose weight, you can absolutely hinder or slower the absolute progress that you can be making. So yeah, it's important to share that.
Yeah. And so do you, for your clients typically, like, and maybe it depends on like where they're at, but is that something that you will focus on initially? Like, hey, do you tell that to most clients that, hey, we're not going to focus on like scale weight too much here. We're just going to focus on getting all these, like, again, training down, nutrition down. And then from there, you look at potentially going into like then trying to get body weight down or something like that.
Yes. So obviously your clients come to you with specific goals, and your job is to help them reach their goals. But your job is also to tell them what's best for them and guide them in a manner that is going to suit them best for the long term, not just for 8 weeks or 12 weeks or 16 weeks. What's going to make the largest difference for the time after we're done working together, right? So for most of the people that reach out to my team and I, the first 2 to 4 weeks are all about establishing good habits and implementing the original plan we set them on. Now, if somebody is obese and they clearly have a lot of body weight to lose, then absolutely we expect their body weight to go down. But one thing I generally do is I actually set people up around theoretical maintenance. So we do our best job of guesstimating what that may be. And by doing so, oftentimes they actually have a hard time getting in all that food and hitting their numbers, because generally we're increasing protein a bit, we're increasing fruit and vegetable intake a bit, and just unprocessed whole foods are going up. So their satiety and their food volume is going up, their processed foods are going down. So generally speaking, they report back to us saying, I'm getting in all this food, but like it's really hard. I'm pretty full. But to me, that is way better than putting someone in a true deficit right off the bat. And they say, hey, I'm really hungry. And that leads them to quote unquote cheat or fall off plan and not sustain the plan. So yeah, I like setting people up at around theoretical maintenance. A lot of the time it's very context dependent, but yeah, develop good habits, improve the areas that can move the needle the most, that, whatever the low hanging fruit is at that time for that particular person, make those improvements, and then monitor over the next 2 to 4 weeks, see what happens, and then make changes as needed.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And
Yeah.
too, I'm not sure if maybe you see this a lot, but people that do come to you and again, that do focus on just like, hey, let's just get weight down. That's all I care about. I find that those people tend to they go at it super quick. Again,
Yeah.
they're like overdoing the cardio, right? And then like they'll
Yeah.
lose muscle in the process. Is that something that you'll see? And then could you maybe explain the what would be the downsides to like going that route?
Yeah, well, I see people do that all the time. It's not necessarily people I work with, because I just won't do that with them. But yeah, we
Right.
see that all the time. What that generally leads to is there's a lack of sustainability. So you can lose weight, and this is a big reason why most people who lose weight regain it and gain even more than that. But what generally happens is you lose body fat too quick. You lose lean body mass. So now your basal metabolic rate is going down. Your resting metabolic rate is going down. There is some magnitude of negative metabolic adaptations that are occurring. Your NEAT generally drops. Your hunger is going to just skyrocket. So yeah, you regain that weight a bit quicker, right? Whether it's because your metabolic rate is lower, or it's because multiple variables are coming into play at once. This is the largest reason why people just fail at diets, and why there is so much need for good education and good approaches to be introduced to the space, because there are so many ways where people can go about losing weight, and people really have a hard time sustaining that weight loss and holding a healthier body weight for a longer period of time. So that's why you could do intermittent fasting, you could do a 3-day fast, you can do these silly detoxes, whatever it may be, and lose that body weight. But you're not going to keep it off if you don't know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how to continue doing it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And then like you said too, people will end up, they'll gain it back. And then, over time, it's like, they're doing the opposite of what we want, right? The body composition looks worse and worse over time because they have less muscle, more body fat. So yeah, that's super important. So I guess then to go to the next, one thing that you did mention too, with the body composition stuff, you mentioned lean mass. Is
Yeah.
that maybe it's important to let people know too that like sometimes when they measure lean mass, it's not necessarily just muscle. There's other things that are also considered lean mass.
1,000%. So yeah, I'll talk about like different assessments and some of the pros and cons and whatnot.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
lean mass, obviously skeletal muscle mass is one very, very large component of that, but it's looking at all of your lean tissue. So your other connective tissue, it's looking at your other organ tissue too. So your heart, your stomach, small intestine, large intestine, something very important, also your liver, right? So like, I'll use myself as a quick example. As I'm going through a contest prep, if I get a DEXA scan at baseline, and that's measuring my lean body mass, at baseline, before I start dieting, my muscle glycogen is going to be full. My liver glycogen is going to be full because I've been eating in a surplus or at theoretical maintenance for a long enough time. My lean body mass at that point is going to be a certain value. As I diet down, whether it's 16, 20 weeks for contest preps, it's been over 24 weeks from the first, the start of prep to the very last show of the season. If I just go in to the lab and get a scan done while I'm dieting in the middle of a diet phase, it's going to say I lost some sort of lean mass. And a large portion of that is because I've lost muscle glycogen. I lost the water inside the muscle. And also, my liver glycogen is probably depleted to a larger extent. And some of my internal organs, like my stomach or small intestine, might actually have lost a little bit of tissue, so to speak. So that is something to take into consideration. Now, let's say you were to do a DEXA scan throughout a diet phase. If you take 2 or 3 carbohydrate refeed days and high calorie days consecutively back to back, and you DEXA'd, that lean body mass is going to be much more accurate when compared to your baseline value. So it's important to kind of understand how these variables play a role. So yeah, if again, DEXA scans are getting more and more popular where private companies offer that. You don't have to go to a university laboratory these days. You can go to these corporate businesses that offer it to the public. Yeah, if you go there and it says you lost lean body mass, but your strength hasn't gone down, your performance is good, you're doing things in a smart way, you might just be depleted. So you want to go in there with a similar nutritional status and hopefully similar glycogen levels to get a more accurate assessment.
Right. Yeah. Cause I do have people that, they'll see that and they'll be like, hey, I lost this weight, but I also lost, lean body mass in the process. And it's like, hey, that's made up of other aspects, not just muscle. And I think a lot of people that would save a lot of people a lot of frustration there by understanding that. So my understanding of these, body comp readers, whether it be a DEXA, BIA, there's going to be a couple of things I think that people need to know about them. I guess, do you maybe want to hit on what would you use in this situation? And then is that, and I know even DEXA, that's considered the gold standard, but from my understanding, and maybe you can hit on this too, there's still going to be a potential little bit of an error with that.
Yep.
And so I'm just curious to hear about that, and then maybe hit on the standardization aspect of it, the importance of that.
Yeah. So
I threw a lot at you.
No. I appreciate it. That my response is going to be funny because the best tool that I think the lay person can use, who's anybody listening to this, don't worry about the BIAs, the handheld BIAs, the in-bodies, the DEXAs. Use skin calipers, as silly as that sounds. So again, if you do a tricep skin calipers, skin fold thickness of your tricep, you do that at your waist, right next to your belly button. You do that behind the calf, whatever, right? You take your skin fold thickness at different sites, and that is going down, you are losing body fat. Skin fold thickness is great for measuring body fat. It's not necessarily going to be great for seeing all right, what's happening to my lean body mass, but you can do a 3 site, you can do a 7 site. I love skin calipers for fat mass because you're either gaining fat or you're not. And it's relatively simple. When it comes to things like bioelectrical impedance, the handheld ones and the in-bodies, or the ones that are handheld and you utilize a foot measurement too, your feet are on, 2 silver detectors. The ones that you have hands and feet are way more accurate than just hands alone. But your hydration status, your nutritional status plays a huge role. So all of these things are supposed to be done in the same standardized fashion. They're supposed to be done fasted in the morning after using the restroom, but before consuming your first meal. I personally, when I get my DEXA scans done, I generally drink 16 or 20 ounces of water every single time before going in. Because generally speaking, people wake up slightly dehydrated. I would want to go into a scan, not hyperhydrated, but just actually at a decent spot from a hydration status. And I'm also taking into consideration, okay, what was my carb intake the last 2 days before going into this? Were they non-training days where my carbs were low? Have I taken off for a long period of time? Or were they normal training days and my carb intake was where it was supposed to be? So all that stuff matters. But yeah, you just want to standardize it. If you walk into your gym and they have an in-body and, one time you're doing it at Saturday at noon, and the next time you're doing it on Monday at 7 in the morning, and your nutritional status is different, your hydration status is different. You really got to take those numbers with a grain of salt, right? So if the thing says like you gained 8 pounds of muscle and lost 2 pounds of fat, you can confidently say, hey, I gained muscle and lost fat, but the actual number might not be accurate. And then another thing to understand, if it says like you lost 1 pound of muscle or you gained 1 pound of fat, don't get crazy about these really small changes. But over a long period of time where you're making substantial changes to body composition, you should at least be trending in like the right direction.
Right. Yeah. Don't necessarily don't get worked up over the small numbers, but again, like those massive numbers, that's where it's like, okay, hey, this is probably at least headed in that direction. And I know you hit on that with yourself with the when you took it when you were losing weight and you had a lot of stuff going on. It was like, it was pretty large. I think you said from lean body mass standpoint. So you were pretty sure that you lost some muscle in that process. What can you expect? And I'm sure this is going to be dependent on the standardization aspect of it, but what can you expect? So say you take a DEXA or maybe you want to hit on both in body. What can you expect from like or do you even know what you can expect from like, hey, it's going to be off by up to, it could be 5%. It could, or is that not known yet? Or is it just really dependent on a lot of different things?
Well, it is dependent on a lot of things, but it really doesn't matter because they're all estimates. So so for individuals the more normal you are as an individual, the closer you are to the mean, the more accurate that assessment is going to be. The further away you are from the mean, so everyone's familiar with just bell curves, right? Like standardized normal distribution curves. Around 66% of the population is going to fall in this realm of a standard bell curve. The further away you are, so if you're extremely, extremely lean, or if you're extremely, extremely obese, it's going to be less accurate. If you're extremely, extremely jacked and you just have a ton of lean mass, it's going to be less accurate. If you're extremely, extremely frail relative to your age and your height and your weight, it's going to be less accurate. So, I mean, take that into consideration, but at the end of the day, they are estimations. And again, for practical purposes, take standardized progress photos, the same lighting, the same camera angle, take waist circumference measurements, potentially take a skin thickness, like skin fold thickness, skin caliper measurements, and track your weight. And you'll see, if things are moving in the right direction or the wrong direction. So yeah, and I just want to quickly clarify, when I was doing these scans, there would be times where it showed that I lost lean mass if I was depleted. And I personally knew, or I was confident, that I wasn't really losing muscle because of my performance maintaining or improving or whatever it may be, and based on my photos and everything. But I understood why it was giving me a lower value. And then when I would eat up and I would refeed and I would refill those glycogen stores, it would show that I did not lose muscle or lean mass. So yeah, take those things with a grain of salt. Again, the bigger the actual changes are, you will see a more accurate depiction in the numbers. But I tell people at the very most, don't do that stuff more than every 4 months, like every 16-ish weeks. Otherwise, just use your other tools that you can use at your own discrepancy at home and you have access to all the time.
It sounds like, again, no, you're fine. It sounds like the education piece on it's super important.
River, come here.
River's making a guest appearance on the podcast.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, you're fine, man. But again, it sounds like the education around it like is important too. Just like with the scale weight, it's like if you understand what's going on with the scale weight, you're not going to sit there and get too overly frustrated with every little like change that happens. Like in your example,
For sure.
you know what's going on with the body comp reader, so it's like, hey, I know that performance is good, and you just knew you were depleted, and I think that's super important there on that. Sure. I just feel like a lot of people just want they want to know that they're making progress for sure. And they need something to tell them that they're making progress.
I agree. People do want to know that they're making progress. And that's why it should be as simple as, am I getting stronger? Am I looking better in standardized photos that I'm taking and controlling? And am I feeling better? You know what I mean? Like we can use other objective metrics that it's just, you can literally just look at and say, okay, things are moving in the right direction.
And I don't know if you've seen this, but I know like when people are like, oh, at the gym we have this, and then they kind of get in their head, and then they start like, oh, I'm not looking any better. Like, they kind of get in their head about it sometimes as well too. When they see these numbers. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, progress can be relatively slow depending on your level of advancement or just depending on your genetics,
genetics, yeah,
right? That plays a role. But if you're an intermediate or a beginner and you're not making progress, you need to reevaluate what you're doing and consider hiring someone who knows what the heck they're doing. Because as a beginner, it's pretty easy to make pretty significant changes, you know?
yep.
So,
So I know you kind of hit on this too. You said about every, like you said, every 4 months or so, you'd say at the minimum on that, right? In terms of like when to take it. Would you,
at the maximum. So
oh, at the
I wouldn't
maximum,
want people doing it more frequently than that because it's
right?
just, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, not more frequently than every 4 months.
yeah.
Would you, so say if you have somebody that does kind of go through cycles of, hey, they're in a deficit, maybe maintenance, surplus. Is there any tips you would give around that in terms of like how you would structure that in terms of like when to take your body comp, stuff like that? Because like you said, obviously certain things are gonna manipulate it. So
Oh,
I don't know if
yeah.
there was a way to line that up or not.
Yeah, for sure. So like, all right, let's say you're gonna do you want to do an 8 week cut or something around that, right? Maybe you want to lose approximately 5 to 10 pounds, whatever it may be. That's your goal, and you want to go and do this 8 week cut for whatever reason. You can absolutely take baseline measurements right before you start the cut, see where you're at, go through the cut, and then literally take 2 to 5 to 7 days at theoretical maintenance as you kind of get out of your cut and you start reverse dieting, whatever approach you're going to take, as long as you're going into the assessment in a more well-fed state, and you're not depleted, and you have kind of recovered that high fatigue state that you were in, you can go do the assessment and it should be relatively accurate in terms of, hey, did I lose a significant amount of fat? Did I gain or lose muscle or maintain? That should be relatively accurate. It'll at least give you a broad stroke paintbrush of, okay, this is what happened.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, ton of great information on the body comp stuff. Never really dove into it too much with anybody, so I thought this would be a good episode. So real quick before I let you go, just a couple personal questions.
Yeah.
Are you I know you competed in the past. Are you planning on competing again soon? What does that look like for you? And then I got one
Yeah.
more question for you after that.
Yeah, sure, man. Yeah, absolutely. So last time I competed was in 2021. First time I ever competed was 2011. So that was like my decade in the sport kind of thing. Finally turned pro in the WNBF.
Congrats.
Took me, thank you, man. Took me, a decade to achieve that. And I do plan on competing again in the future. I'm thinking it's going to be 2025. My wife and I are expecting our first kid here in
Awesome.
about 6 weeks or so. So that's clearly the priority. And yeah, I just want to, give myself, what is that going to give me, at least a year and a half to not, call it a year to get into the swing of things, and then, another year or 8 months or so to like really turn things on for a contest prep. But I think I'll get back out there in 2025 and see how I could do in the professional ranks.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
That's super exciting. And I guess for you then right now, are you just focused on being in like a small surplus, or are you sitting around maintenance and just focused on building muscle, or what does that look like for you? And then when you have your kid, is that going to change anything?
Yeah. Yeah. So right now, I am sitting in a small surplus as a whole, but there are still some days that I'm probably in a slight deficit. There are plenty of days where I'm really very close to around theoretical maintenance. And there are some days that I'm in a larger surplus, and I don't stress that right now. So my weight gain is trending up when I zoom out over the long haul, but that might not even be a week to week thing. It might be more of a month to month thing. So my rate of gain is relatively slow at the moment. I've been doing this for so long that I know if I'm eating well enough to perform good, recover good, and just feel good overall. And because I do want to maximize my current muscle building potential, I try to be in a slight surplus on these training days for sure. And that gives me a lot more flexibility to fit in, a couple of processed snacks here and there and be more flexible and not really stress the nutrition too much. I basically eat anywhere from 180 to 230 grams of protein per day. I generally have 30 to 55 grams of protein every time I eat a meal. And I generally eat, 4 to 5 meals a day, so to speak. So things are flexible for me. It's relatively effortless for me. It's kind of just second nature stuff at this point. But yeah, I'm in around maintenance, slight surplus, and like slowly trending up.
Just making sure that training's in a good spot, and you're kind of making sure that that's, again, you're progressing and everything like that.
Yeah. And I'm only resistance training 4 days per week. It's the lowest overall frequency I've ever trained with. My contest prep actually took a slightly similar approach where I was training like 4 to 5 days per week in terms of lifting weights. And yeah, I'm just like not stressing like, oh, I need to train 6 days per week or whatever it is. Like I'm kind of just looking at the big picture stuff. But yeah, training frequency is low. Doing my best to progress on my key staple lifts, tracking that stuff objectively. But I don't expect progress to come week to week. I'm not at that phase where progress is going to come that quick because I've been doing it for so long. So, if I maintain my objective lifts on one day, like I use the same load and I perform the same reps as I did last week, I'm not like, oh shit, this was a terrible lifting session. It's just like progress comes really, really slow at this point, and taking a 5-pound increase on a dumbbell bench press, that can be like a very large jump. And I understand that that's not going to happen on a week to week basis. So as long as things are progressing like month to month or, block to block, I'm like, all right, some progress is here.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when you have your baby here, and you said 6 weeks, I think, anything's going to change there? You're going to just try to keep 4 days a week, or you're just going to kind of see how it goes?
Yeah, I would love to try to keep 4 days per week. Fortunately, I know that I could, but I might, who knows? I might not even want to. I might just want to spend more time with my son. So,
right. Son. Awesome.
Yeah. I might, I might reduce it to 3 days per week. I would assume too, that first week, I might just take an entire, maybe 1 or 2 weeks off, but I don't want that to go for too long. I do want to kind of develop, like keep good habits and not let that totally overhaul my day to day, where it's like, hey, the gym is a 12-minute car ride for me. I can get in there for 75 to 90 minutes, get my shit done, come home, and then still do what I have to do. So fingers crossed. We'll see what happens when he gets here and how the wife kind of, is doing and how I can support and what I got to do.
Yep. No, that's awesome, man. Congrats on that too. That's big. So last question before I let you go. Any research coming up that you're a part of or anything like that?
Yeah. So we have a research study that's being written right now. We're going through like the final stages before submitting it for peer review. It's on volume. So we've done previous training studies on different resistance training volume. Our last one was by my man, Dan Albay. He was the first author. So it's Albay and colleagues, and it was published in 2021, I believe. We looked at subjects either performing 12 sets per week, 18 sets per week, or 24 sets per week for legs. And we just super quick spark notes on it. We basically saw that the 12 sets per week group and the 18 sets per week group had greater gains in strength and muscle size compared to the 24 sets per week group. So that started pointing in the direction of like, yeah, there's probably this inverted U when it comes to volume, where if you're doing too much and you're not recovering well, you might not be optimizing your progress. But more importantly, that's what the group mean said. More importantly, in every single group, there were individuals that responded well. There were individuals that made no gains at all, and some individuals that regressed in all groups. So that was the first study. This study is actually pretty darn cool. Rather than throwing different subjects into a specific set number per week, we had one group do the same amount of sets per week that they did before starting the study. So before they were a subject and before we got our hands on them. We had another group increase their volume by 30% relative to what they previously did. And another group increased their volume by 60% relative to what they were previously doing before starting the study. I can't actually share the results, so to speak, but that's coming soon. Cool. The results are really, really interesting. But again, the group means, I don't know how important that is, because you're still seeing this crazy stuff in terms of individual responses where some people respond great, some people don't. So yeah, that's coming out soon. I have another study with my colleagues like Dr. Guillermo Escalante, Grant Tinsley, and Dr. Brad Schoenfeld on peak week. So bodybuilding peak week in primarily enhanced competitors, looking at their nutritional approach, their hydration status. So a lot of these people implement dangerous and silly dehydration practices. So that's coming out hopefully relatively soon. And I'm helping a current master's student with another study, an acute study looking at back training. So we have a lot of research that studies how, horizontal bench pressing, incline pressing, decline pressing, and overhead pressing has impacted the front delts, the chest, the clavicular head, the sternocostal head, the triceps. But we don't have a lot of research looking at different pull down variations. So we're looking at a pure extension-based pull down, like a single arm extension-based pull down, similar to like a neutral grip pull-up or a neutral grip lat pull down, compared to a pure shoulder adduction pull in, right? So elbow to hip, kind of more like a pronated or a wide pronated lat pull down. But we're doing single arm stuff, and we're looking at muscle activation of the lats. We're looking at two regions. So we're looking at like the thoracic lat and the lumbar iliac lat, right? And then we're looking at the teres major, the rear delt, the tricep, the bicep. So that's coming soon. And that's kind of it for now. I don't know exactly. I have ideas of research projects, but I don't know exactly what I'm going to be tackling next after all that. But yeah, that's some of the research going on.
Hopefully it'll be some body recomposition stuff. No, I'm just kidding. Whatever.
Yeah. I mean, man, I'm so interested in that topic. It's a difficult thing to study directly.
Yeah.
I do have some ideas though, so we'll see what the future has in store.
Let's go. I love it. Yeah. No, that's all super cool. All three of those studies I think will be good. I know you guys did a peak week one, so I'm sure that's kind of going to go off of that one that you guys did recently. And then the volume stuff, super cool too. And it sounds like, and obviously I know you said you can't really say anything, but it seems like the individualization of volumes just super key with it all.
Super important. Super important. Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of practice, when you're working with individuals one-on-one, you should be individualizing everything they're doing anyway. I think strength and conditioning coaches need to take this stuff into consideration, because a lot of team sport athletes, they all just do the same workout. Right. It's like, all right, this is the workout for the team, or this is the workout for your position. And that might not be the best way to go about things, right? It's just like, yeah, here's, 30 athletes on this one team. They're all doing the same program, but maybe it should be more individualized. So, yeah, super cool. Excited to see the direction that this field continues to go in, and keep asking good questions, trying to get sound answers, and still, trying to move the field forward. But the science isn't perfect by any means. One of the last things I'll say is when I first started off as a grad student, and when I was an undergrad student, I really valued the findings of a scientific study, and whatever the authors said in their discussion, whatever their recommendations were, I really, really valued that. And I trusted that. And I would see other people in the field who were researchers that I looked up to, if they shared something and they shared it in a very confident manner that like, oh, this is better than that, I really believed that to be true. The more and more experience I have had with research and critically analyzing other people's research, it actually means like the results mean less to me now than they did back then. So take these things with a grain of salt. Try to find people who understand how to critique it and that are skeptical for the right reasons, not just because they're haters or they're assholes. Like, there are so many people who are skeptical of research that have no business talking about research and don't understand it at all, but they're just like, oh, I don't agree with this, whatever. It's like, it's just, there's so many things going on in the social media world. There's so many camps, so many different, beliefs and egos in play that it just could be a shit show out there, to be honest with you. But yeah, I think the people that are spending hours and hours and hours and hours of their life on one project, their heart's in it for the right reason for the most part, and they are trying to move the field forward. So much respect to the people, doing their thing.
Yeah. And man, it takes forever too. It's a slow process, but it's good to hear from you too, that, you've gone through it, and it's good to hear your experience of like, hey, I used to fall in that camp of like, hey, research says it, this is what it is. But now you're realizing, hey, that, it's not perfect. And there's good potential, you just have to, you can't just take it for face value, and
100%.
I think that's a good thing to let people know. So, appreciate your time, man, and keep doing good work. Before I let you go, is there anywhere where the audience can find you?
Sure. Yeah. So you guys can go to my website. It's schoolofgains.com. Gains is spelled with a Z. You'll have some, free articles on there, some free resources, and then some paid programs. So different training programs. I have that really, really good nutrition ebook co-authored with Jeff Nippert on there. So that's called The Ultimate Guide to Body Recomposition. Obviously, we spoke about body recomp this whole podcast. So what I can do is, this is called the Mind Muscle Connection podcast, right?
Yep.
I'll create a discount code. It'll
Sweet.
be MMC for Mind Muscle Connection. You guys can save 20% off that nutrition ebook or a training program. Yeah, so you can find me there. You can find me on Instagram too. It's just my full name. It's Christopher.Barakat on Instagram. And feel free to shoot me a DM or go to the email in the bio of my Instagram and shoot me over email if you have a question or something that you're interested in. More than happy to get back to you guys and answer a question if I can, or point you in the right direction. But yeah, man, stay tuned. More things coming slowly but surely. And I look forward to what the future has in store.
Awesome, man. Yep. Appreciate your time. And yep, we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me on, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Thanks for listening, guys.